Hello everyone, it is yet another day in this The Clown Decade, where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and today we're doing something that when we started this channel I never thought I'd really be in the position in, but I'm actually going to be making fun of a free speech extremist, which oddly enough I'd still put myself in that category, but honestly, the arguments made in today's video, I think you will even go, oh my god, I can't believe I used to be this cringe too. Because don't get me wrong, free speech is still a principle that I hold relatively dearly, but in the modern day where things are getting a little bit too spicy when it comes to some things said in the public debate, I think it's time that we actually start seeing where this line is drawn properly, rather than saying to the government, please stop jailing people for making jokes with their pugs. I suppose in defence of the state there, Count Dankula was never jailed, but he was fined and he didn't even have the opportunity to protest said fine. Anyway, the issue that we are going to be talking about today is seeing arguments from post-liberals, I think we can call them at this point, like Matt Goodwin, who says we need a line in the sand when it comes to the state actually doing something about, quite frankly, terrorist supporters in our society, and Ella Whelan, who used to work for Spiked, but she seemed to disappear for 3 years, effectively saying that there is absolutely no need for a line in the sand. So let's hear each side of this case.
I think essentially what we need to try and do as a country is try and get the debate to a place where we are realistic about the main threat that's facing us.
Yep, Matt Goodwin is absolutely correct here. We are having a struggle session almost as a country, where a lot of, for lack of a better term, I suppose, common people are shouting out about all these issues that they are seeing all over the place, whether that be the economy, cost of living, housing crisis, immigration, all of these problems that they're seeing all over the place, and the government priorities seem to be on making an example of the far right. I will go into a video on that tomorrow, don't worry. Committing to censorship online that's, in my opinion, absolutely pointless. That is not the worst place we are seeing speech being abused, and giving minimal tax cuts while at the same time getting constant headlines about having to find an extra 9 billion or something for the public purse. In short, the conversations going on between the electorate and the elected seem to be completely different conversations, and this is Matt Goodwin's point, and he goes into more detail here.
The threat that's facing us currently, the major threat by a long way, is radical violent Islamism. So firstly, what is our strategy for dealing with that as a country?
Yep, absolutely fair enough. There are plenty of people we are seeing throughout the UK at the moment calling for deportations of people who are clearly not a good fit to be in the country. Those types like I had in the clips of the last video where I was going on about Owen Jones not understanding Rishi Sunak's speech, where they were quite frankly celebrating the deaths of 400 or so Israeli Jews after the October 7 attack, calling it a victory, refusing to condemn the terrorist attack, and, of course, going on to intimidate enough people within London to make it feel unsafe for many Jews there. Something obviously needs to be done about that. Matt Goodwin is pointing that out. A lot of people agree.
Around that is being enabled both by mass immigration, which we're not allowed to criticise, a broken policy of multiculturalism, which clearly isn't working because it prioritises group difference over the things that we share in common, and it's being enabled and encouraged by a radicalised cultural left, which is bringing in identity politics, which gives radical Islamists a free pass.
And I have plenty of videos on my own channel clearly making that point and supporting that point with many pieces of evidence. And in fact, one of those videos was taken down recently because it apparently contained misinformation, despite the fact that all the information I put in my videos has a direct link to the source in the description. So it appears either YouTube is relatively on side for that, or their review system is just completely busted.
So we need to deal with each of these challenges in turn, and we need a national debate that is not driven by liberal commentators inside the M25 who have a moral panic and meltdown anytime somebody questions these policies and whether or not they're working, as we saw with Suella Braverman. We need a grown-up discussion like the French are having, like the Germans are having, like the Swedes are having.
Yeah, and they've just gone ahead and started deporting radical Islamists, by the way. France expelled a radical imam who made unacceptable remarks about the country's flag, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin has said. Majoub Majoubi, no way that's his name, appeared to call the French flag satanic in a video that went viral online earlier this week. Mr. Darmanin, said France's immigration reforms have enabled the swift deportation of the imam, but the imam denies any wrongdoing and said he had not meant to be disrespectful by calling the flag satanic. Okay. Majoub Majoubi, who hails from Tunisia but came to France 38 years ago, was an imam at the Atouba Mosque in the small town of Bagnols-sur-Cèze in the south of France. I'm sure I've butchered most of those French words, but I don't care, I hate the French. He was arrested earlier this week after a video circulated online showing him describing the tricoloured flag as satanic and saying it has no value with Allah. And I suppose this is the whole point that Matt Goodwin is trying to get across here. We are having currently massive issues with Islamic terror, Islamists all over encouraging people to join ISIS, to the point that more British Muslims joined ISIS than have joined the British Army. Ever, by the way. So quite clearly, as he says, this idea of multiculturalism is going completely wrong. And so what France has said is, okay, you're in France, I nearly said Britain, but no, you're in France. You have to respect French customs, and if you don't, we have the right to deport you. And quite frankly, that's just what a lot of people want in the United Kingdom. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say, if you are an immigrant and have come here and are a guest here, you need to show respect for the country. And if you do not, and go to the extreme of saying that effectively the French flag or British flag in Britain is evil, then yeah, you need to get out of here. You're not welcome here. Because immigration really needs to start being a two-way street, rather than just we give immigrants everything, opportunity, benefits, whatever else, and they can do whatever they want to Britain, as far as they're concerned. No, we need to start saying no. We need to start demanding things from you. We have given you a damn good life.
This isn't actually, not everything, Ella, is a free speech issue. Sometimes this is about security and ensuring that you can provide your citizens with the basic thing that a state should give them, which is keeping them safe and secure.
And this is true, and something that I realised very early when I started reading into liberal philosophy. It is very much just a philosophy for a country that has dealt with all existential threats and externalities. It's really a philosophy for when we can actually start looking inside our own country, our own society. Because during, say, World War II, we went way against any sort of liberalism. We had internment camps for Germans. Obviously, we had the rationing system, which is another very illiberal policy. And all this makes sense. And the problem is, at the moment, is that a lot of people, especially liberals, by which, to be specific, I mean fourth layer or fifth layer left-wing liberals, the type that are all about the welfare state and identity politics, don't seem to realise that we're in actually quite a dangerous situation. We're not in a state of open war, but we are in a state where we actually have a lot of enemies within the gates. And we have a political class that is not willing to do anything about it. This is Matt Goodwin's point.
And if I'm a British Jew, looking at the events in recent months, by the way, and probably thinking it's time to leave Britain, then they're asking for a serious response to this as well.
Yeah, and that is a point that I go on about as well, because I don't think many people seem to realise this, but we do have actually had integrated British Jews within British society since at least the English Civil War, since the 1600s, and obviously quite a few have migrated to England and Britain since then, especially into London communities, to avoid anti-Semitism going on throughout Europe, especially Eastern Europe, and they integrated very, very well. And given that they are so well integrated and they don't cause issues at all to the same extent that modern Islamists are, in fact, I don't even think it's comparable, and now we are failing part of our British society, I think, yeah, it's well within the government's own rights to say, we need to protect these parts of British society. Because if you think that it's only going to end at British Jews, I mean, clearly that's just not true. They're already attacking British businesses simply for selling Coca-Cola because of that stupid boycott that's going on. This is an issue that's only going to get worse, and the earlier you deal with it, the easier it is going to be. Because if you don't do anything about it, you are going to see riots.
You make your points about migration, and I think probably a lot of viewers and listeners in this channel will agree in terms of lowering the numbers going forward. But they're particularly, take Rochdale, for example. A lot of the people who voted for Galloway there are their sons and daughters of migrants. They're second-generation people.
To which the implication here from Ella Whelan is, well, you can't do anything about them, they're British citizens. To which I say, well, Shamima Begum. Now we can just take it from them if we find good reason to. Because an awful lot of countries consider you or allow you to become a citizen of the country of your parents. Because that, of course, makes basic sense. I think it's absolutely mental that just because you're born in, say, Britain, the soil's magic here and therefore you're British. No, that is never how it should work. Otherwise, by that logic, George Orwell and Rudyard Kipling were Indian men.
Don't really know what you're asking for. It starts to sound like you are suggesting that if people don't go along with an official policy of integration, what, are you going to deport them? Are you going to strip them of their citizenship?
Unironically, ideally, yes. If you don't integrate, why should you stay in the country? And obviously, Matt Goodwin and I are not going to be saying you have to only eat roast dinners every Sunday for the next 5 years, otherwise you're going to get deported. That's obviously ridiculous. This is obviously more to do with the character of the person, and I think it's a pretty decent baseline to say, if you go off and join ISIS, or if you are openly in support of prescribed terrorist groups, then we can consider you not well integrated enough, and we have reason to deport you, strip you of your citizenship, whatever it takes to get rid of you, because you're not welcome here, even if you are a second-generation immigrant. Because it's a thing I don't really get from Ella Whelan throughout this entire conversation. Doesn't it kind of blow your mind that in this multicultural Britain, where we're supposed to have everyone getting along, we've effectively managed to get a situation where many of these second-generation immigrants, as you say, which I hate that term anyway, but where these second-generation immigrants are voting for, quite frankly, I think it's fair to say that he is an Islamist, George Galloway. I mean, the guy was investigated by the police in 2014 for wanting Bradford to be an Israeli-free zone. Is it not reasonable to deal with terrorist sympathisers in some way?
Let me be absolutely clear. Like France, firstly, if you're a foreign national glorifying Islamist terrorism, you should be removed from the country. Secondly, if you're
what
a
does
British...
glorifying mean? That's the free, where the free speech issue comes
voicing
in.
support...
I mean, I don't mind being absolutely precise with your language, but what does glorifying mean? It's very basic. If you talk about the Hamas attacks of October 7th in any positive way, such as, say, not condemning it, such as calling it a victory, then you should absolutely be deported. That is absolutely fair.
Voicing support for a prescribed organisation such as Hamas.
I believe Academic Agent some time ago came up with the idea of leftists argue as if they're hatchlings, as if they don't know what these things mean, and this is a perfect example of it. What do you mean by glorifying terrorists? Showing support for terrorist groups? Like, how many ways do you want me to put it? And it's a good thing that Matt Goodwin just stands by his convictions and just basically says, I will put this in the most simple, unrefutable language I can possibly put it, and say, if you show support for a terrorist organisation, you're out of here. And if you're against that, I don't know what to tell you. You're just blowing my mind as a person.
But that's different to campaigning. Glorifying is different to campaigning.
Secondly...
I love how Matt Goodwin just goes straight into his second point and just ignores that intervention by Ella Whelan, as if campaigning or glorifying, as if there's any meaningful difference between whether you should be deported or not. Because the people who are showing open support for Hamas, as I say, they're doing it in the open. They're doing it in the middle of Bradford. They're doing it in the middle of London. Some even managed to get pictures of the police with their child dressed up as a Hamas soldier. There are open calls for intifada or holy wars and jihad on the streets of Britain. And Ella's shield for these people is, oh, well, they're not campaigning for it. As if that's a good enough defence for stopping the deportation of these people. No, these people are supporting terrorists. We cannot tolerate that.
If you're a British national glorifying Islamist terrorism, we have legislation for that. We have laws that need to be imposed by the police.
I mean, this is absolutely right. We unfortunately have some conflicting laws in this country where, as we've seen in the court system over and over, people have been stopped from being deported despite either being terrorist sympathisers or, you know, full-blown murderers and rapists due to contradicting human rights legislation that we signed up for in, say, the EHRC or even the UN. And Matt Goodwin is effectively saying, well, we can ignore that because Germany, France and Sweden are all ignoring it, and we can just deport them. I mean, seriously, what are international laws going to do? You'd actually need a war to enforce them, and there's no way Europe's going to bother with that when we've got things like, you know, Russia invading Ukraine.
I think that the way to handle this issue is not to deport and lock up our way out of it. I think that is an intolerant and illiberal approach to a challenge in society.
As I said at the beginning, I never thought I'd be making fun of someone making these points, but yeah, no, absolutely ridiculous position to take. And this is where free speech extremism just gets purely cringe. Censoring speech is illiberal, yes. Being illiberal throughout most of human history has been not only inevitable but also necessary. Liberalism is a philosophy for the well-off, the privileged, if you will. It's the philosophy of allowing yourself to let your guard down because you don't have existential threats. And it reached its peak in the 90s after the Berlin Wall fell, after communism fell, because what existential threat did we have? The answer, we didn't really have one. Unfortunately, they then developed into post-Soviet Russia and China. However, they never turn into existential threats, just threats that feel like they're on the other side of the planet because they are, and that look like they could grow. But the threat that we've made now, it's homegrown almost. We got so liberal and we cared so much about the economic outcomes of the country, the almighty GDP line, that people like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they sent out search parties around the globe to try and find communities that were willing to come over. They found some in Pakistan, they found some others in the Middle East, they found some in some African countries, things like that. And some of these people that came over, they've now come over and created a mess like, I think we can say, like Rochdale, where a rather large voting bloc is perfectly happy to vote someone in like George Galloway, who is openly anti-Israeli and teeters on the line of moving over to being completely anti-Semitic. He just doesn't seem to do it openly. And he's very good at playing the political game in that way. And this is something that you're going to be seeing over a lot of areas like this. It's part of the reason Sadiq Khan keeps getting voted back in. A lot of voters are just open and saying it's about ethnicity. They'd rather vote for someone like them because Sadiq Khan comes from a Pakistani background. And so it's free votes as far as he's concerned. And now it's becoming so emboldened that, yes, they are taking over the streets of London every Saturday. Every Saturday you go on Twitter, there's people constantly putting up ridiculous things that are being said and that are happening in London. Hence you have a lot of Jews that do not feel safe going out to London on Saturdays. And Ella Whelan here is saying locking them up isn't going to solve anything. No, it will very much. I'll agree with you, it's not very liberal, but we're at a time where we can't afford to live the life of privileged people because we're not as privileged as we were. We've imported a problem. But I will give Ella a bit of a olive branch here and say, fair enough, we should probably be careful about this because I do agree with you. It's obviously not going to be all of them, and there are going to be plenty who are integrated and who are genuinely on the side of anti-Israel because they do care about the civilians in Palestine. That's absolutely fine.
What you're suggesting does cost lives, so you're aware of that. Because if we deported many of the asylum seekers that went on to commit Islamist atrocities, like, for example, in Manchester, people wouldn't have lost their lives.
I have no problem with. I think no one would have any problem with deporting and getting rid of people.
You just said you do have a problem with deportation.
I'm talking about people in Rochdale who are second-generation immigrants.
I mean, that's quite a stupid thing to say because the Manchester Arena bomber, I believe he was a second-generation immigrant and his family were from Libya. And given that Rochdale is in Manchester, it blows my mind that Ella would say in reply to the Manchester Arena attack bomber being the example given here that, oh no, I'm worried about doing something too harsh to the second-generation immigrants in, say, Rochdale. Well, one of them blew up Manchester Arena.
I think the interest, if we take the issue of the pro-Palestine marches, what do you have going on there? You have a large section of people who are on those marches because they look at what's happening in Gaza and they're appalled.
Yep, sure, fine. As I say, we need to be somewhat careful about this, but then you get the obvious problem of how do you know people aren't just using the, oh, I just care about the poor, innocent civilians as a bit of a shield from their, I really want Hamas to wipe out the Israelis.
And I wouldn't like them to be labelled with the extremist or anti-Semitic label because it's just not true.
Again, yeah, fine. And the thing is, though, they would start going off and doing their own marches if they realise that actually joining in those marches will get them smeared with that label, whether it's true or not. Because it's only when the EDL or Football Lads Alliance started getting people arrested that it started to fall apart a bit as a group, because people were not willing to join these marches that ended up turning quite violent against the police because they didn't want to be smeared with these labels. Well, what's a really good way to get some punch behind these labels? Actually start arresting people who are saying, say, Hamas' attack on Israel on October 7th was a victory. People wouldn't be saying that anymore. People wouldn't even go near these marches because they would not want to be smeared with the anti-Semitic label, because they know it would probably be true if they're implicitly supporting people who are genuinely anti-Semitic. But they can make their own clearly separate marches, that is, just for I don't want any more civilian deaths in war.
But you also have in those protests significant sections of people who are either openly pro-Hamas, unashamedly pro-Hamas, and then a large section of people, quite often from Muslim communities, who are sort of just putting their fingers in their ears and saying, okay, I'll just let this slide because I don't want to go there and having a row about anti-Semitism.
All right, cool. At least you are admitting that there is quite a large problem with these protests then. I think I'll leave it at that.
Now, I think the way to approach that, without clamping down on protest, without jailing people for having political views, even if they are utterly distasteful, is to have kind of open discussions about the issue of Islamism.
It's so tiring that we're in a world where we are literally having protests pretty much every day of the week in every major city. Like, I think every time I go to a major city, I see some sort of protest about something random. And then when it's protests that are shutting down entire cities, protests that are forcing Jewish people to stay in their homes for a day at the weekend, openly calling for and showing support for a terrorist organisation, all of a sudden it's, we shouldn't clamp down on protests. No, we probably should. There are obviously times where protesting goes too far, crosses a line to just open support for terrorism, or completely shuts down people's ability to go about their daily lawful business. Obviously, when these things are happening, the state is well within its rights to put a stop to it.
You know, if you take the
but what specifically do you do with the Hamas supporters on the marches? What do you do with those? Oh, is this where we just have an open debate about them?
Part of the reason I wanted to go through this argument as well is because I love how much Matt Goodwin is sticking by his argument of, effectively, you are a limp liberal who has absolutely no conviction in what she actually believes in, and effectively want to pretend that you can just be a referee in this game and not be involved. No. You are involved, you are part of British society, and when you see other Brits suffering at the hands of, you know, even if it is second-generation foreigners, and even other Brits, let's be clear about that too, other Brits are supporting this as well, you actually have a duty to at least do something about it or support people doing something about it, because if your answer is just don't do anything about it and just try and shame them a bit, then I'm afraid that we've been trying to do that for some time and it doesn't get us anywhere, so... Yeah, as Matt Goodwin says, what is your solution?
If you are openly calling for physical action and violence...
If I'm wearing a Hamas bandana?
Yeah, I think it's abhorrent. I think it's terrible. I think it should be criticised.
You would agree with those... You don't agree with them being put in jail?
No, because it all comes down to the...
I think this is going to have to be my new go-to image when leftists say something absolutely ridiculous online, because Matt Goodwin's whole point here is that the most very basic line that we should probably draw in the sand is that if you are showing open support for Hamas, and by wearing a Hamas bandana you are doing that, it's equivalent to wearing a, you know, Nazi swastika armband or something like that, then if you're a foreign national you should be deported. If you're a British national you should be put in jail. And while Ella Whelan is saying, oh, it's despicable and disgusting, she won't cross the line in the sand and say, yes, they should be face legal punishment for that. Which is why Matt Goodwin is pulling such a face, because he can see that she agrees that it is a problem and probably should be dealt with in some way, but getting the state involved, that's icky. I mean, I'm still pretty libertarian despite moving more to conservatism over the past couple of years, but even I think back in my 2016 to, when did I start this channel? 2018 days, would find it quite hard to agree with Ella here. I'd like to think so anyway. But I mean, I'm sure if I went back and listened to my videos from 2018, I'd surprise myself there. So I guess all I can say is thank God I've grown since then.
It all comes down to the issue of what's the long-term gain here? What's the long-term
To
plan?
eradicate Islamist extremism.
You don't.
Yeah, it really is that simple, Ella. We literally do effectively have an internal civil war on our hands. It's not quite got to open street violence yet, though it nearly did in Leicester, and native Brits weren't even involved in that violence. But we've clearly got quite a large problem with integrating Islamic extremists. In fact, I wager you'd agree it's impossible to integrate Islamic extremists into Britain. And so something needs to be done about it. And yes, the state, whose job it is to protect British society, does need to get involved in protecting British society from Islamist extremists.
You don't eradicate Islamist extremism by driving it underground and pretending that it doesn't exist by locking it up.
Oh, it's such a bad argument to make. By locking them up and deporting them, you're not pretending it's not there and it doesn't exist. The point is that you are addressing it. You are saying, right, you are openly supporting terrorist states that are committing terrorist acts against our allies. We are not having you in this country supporting that, making our own people here feel unsafe, feel like they're intimidated. We are not letting you intimidate them full stop. You got to get out of here, or if we can't get you out of here, you're going to jail. The point isn't to destroy the idea. Ideas are transcendental. They exist outside of space and time. You obviously can't destroy an idea. The point is that if we do have radical Islamism in Britain, we get rid of it or lock them up so that they can't do any damage to British society, whether that's the people or, as it is unfortunately already too late to do now, within the walls of power.
So the answer is to keep Hamas supporters on the streets wearing Hamas balaclavas, saying to other people, by the way, that voicing support for Islamist terrorism is acceptable in British society.
No, you're being a little bit silly.
No, you said you'd leave.
So now you get the classic GB News thing of both the panelists have a bit of a go at each other, and you can't get anything useful out of it until obviously the mediator intervenes. But Ella Whelan literally did just say, no, I don't agree we should be deporting people with Hamas balaclavas, and Matt Goodwin reiterated that point, and I think Ella realised that point was silly and instead tried to call him silly to make it out that she didn't say that, but she did. She literally just said it. So I think we should get to her defence and let her try and re-clarify her point.
I'm not suggesting that we let it slide. I think we have to make clear that there's a very big difference between creating social norms and condemning things we disagree with amongst ourselves.
Words are nice, but we're
Again, I love how Matt Goodwin deals with this, because he can't be bothered with all this flowery language, and I cut out about 20 seconds of Ella Whelan effectively virtue signalling, saying, oh no, I care about political discourse in the masses, I care about political action from the masses. As if that's anything to do with what we're saying. Matt Goodwin isn't saying ban all protests. Matt Goodwin is saying, can we at least find where this line is? And if we can't even have the baseline of banning people from wearing Hamas signifiers on their persons, then I don't know even where your line, Ella, begins. And if it's just trusting the people to say to these intimidating Islamists, by the way, I don't think you should be wearing that, it's a bit anti-Semitic, you're going to get laughed at. You know, this is how civilizations die, by not defending themselves and not saying to other civilizations, that is wrong and we're never going to allow that here.
Somebody wearing a Hamas banner is implicitly supporting the atrocities committed against Jews in Israel.
And that is abhorrent.
And they should be allowed to march on Britain's streets, is what you're saying.
I'm saying that we're not going to deal with this issue of rising Islamist threat by simply pretending that we can lock it all up, that we can, that has been, I mentioned the Prevent programme from the beginning of the programme. The government's response to this is to clamp down on protests and just say no one's allowed to say anything.
That's just not true. That's just not true at all. No, nobody at all is saying ban all protests. Not even Matt Goodwin, not even me. It is perfectly fine to protest saying Israel should probably slow down and be more meticulous in their targets because we feel that too many civilians are dying. That would be fine if that's what was being said, but that is not the main thing being said at these protests. And that is why it's perfectly reasonable to ban protests where the main lines being said are from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which is a pro-war message, by the way. It may be revolutionary, maybe a bit Star Wars to some people, but realistically it means the eradication of an ally, which we obviously cannot condone. Or they're shouting for intifada and jihad, and the Met Police are saying, actually, this can just mean inner struggle, you know. As if the context of saying it of an ongoing war isn't a pro-war message. And Matt Goodwin's doing a damn good job of saying to Ella Whelan, you are allowing these pro-war messages to happen in the UK against an ally. And it is causing a big rupture in the societies in London.
What that message that sends, and we know that this trend in relation to other totally unrelated political issues like the growth of support for Donald Trump or whatever else, that if you push things underground and you say that people can't have debates,
I'm saying uphold the law.
And you say you can't have debates and discuss even very tense things openly.
I said have a debate.
Then what you do is you don't deal with the issue.
Yes, but it's very, very different with Donald Trump because, Donald Trump didn't ruin the fabric of American society. He wasn't saying from the Pacific to the Atlantic, rednecks will be free, under the context that when that is being said, it means the eradication of Democrat cities via literal rocket strikes. Yes, there have been many free speech issues that I have been on your side with, Ella, but on this particular one, I think it's absolutely fair to uphold laws that are there to stop terrorist sympathies and stop the encouragement of people joining terrorist factions and glorifying said terrorist factions that have led to the justifying of killing of many Israeli Jews, and let's face it, is probably going to end up with the killing of Jews in Britain as well, if we do not eradicate it, as Matt Goodwin says.
What I think that the worst response to the vile anti-Semitism we've seen grown on the streets today is to be censorious, because we know what happens with the censorious approach to anti-Semitism.
Well, let's
let the
Hamas
and it
supporters run around on Britain's streets with Hamas insignia, because that is surely the cure to the problem of radical Islamism.
I think this was actually quite a way into the show, and I think they'd already been discussing about Shamima Begum as well, and I think they're just fed up with each other. Ella just sees Matt as I don't think she'd be as stupid as to call him a fascist, but she is saying that he's censorious. And Matt just sees her as I said before, a limp, flaccid liberal who has absolutely no backbone. And I'm afraid that seems more true than Ella's assessment of Matt Goodwin, because as Matt Goodwin said in the argument they just had, he's not for censorship. He's not for not having any protests. He's not even for saying that people can't be pro-Palestine. He just doesn't want to see, as many people don't want to see, radical Islamists allowed to be let loose on the streets of London and other major cities in Britain. It's not asking that much. He's asking for a line to be drawn in the sand there. And Ella Whelan can't even appreciate that the line is anywhere near the beach.
This is exactly the problem with Britain. What you're trying to paint me as is somebody that just wants to lock everybody up and forget that we have a problem.
Said.
Well, no. Let me be clear.
You said deport and jail.
Yeah, I said deport foreign nationals who glorify Islamist terrorism, which is what the French are doing and it's what the Germans are doing.
I mean, Matt's really hit the money with that sentence right there. Yes, Ella is trying to make it out like he's being a censorious dictator, more or less, authoritarian, if you will. And every time he's accused of that, he's straight on with no, that's not what I said. That isn't anywhere close to what I said. I just want us to do what the rest of Europe are doing, which is obviously sensible.
I then said, secondly, if you are showing Hamas insignia, if you are expressing support for Hamas on Britain's streets, that is breaking the law. You should be arrested and you should be put in prison. This is not hard. This isn't about free speech. This is about upholding the British rule of law.
It is about free speech. We could go into a row about hate speech laws. We could.
Matt is so done with this, and I am too. I'm afraid to say, Ella, people like you're going to be known as nothing in 2 or 3 years' time. You're going to be known as the people that literally witnessed Britain having people openly support terrorism on the streets of Britain and say, don't do anything about it, just tell them that's bad. Just tell them it's bad. Because I don't want anything that we do to one day lead to anything close to hate speech laws. And I think it's ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous to be absolute on anything. You know what, I've said for a while that I'm a free speech absolutist. I mean, that's never been really strictly true. I've always been in favour of libel laws. I've always been in favour of arresting people who have direct calls to violence where there's a reasonable chance that it will lead to said violence that's being encouraged. They're obviously good baselines. And this, I'm afraid, Ella, does come under that second criteria of if you are showing support for terrorist groups, you are going to be encouraging more terrorism. And there is a credible threat of that. 40,000 Muslims, something like that? Or to be more specific, 40,000 Islamists are on MI5's watch list. 40,000 people potentially could commit a terrorist attack in the UK. And if they are seeing Hamas insignia everywhere and they're sympathising with Hamas, they're going to be encouraged to do that. That's all this law is trying to manage, to make sure people don't do. And you're there saying, but it could lead to a hate speech law. And that's why people like Matt and people like me are fed up with this argument. Yes, free speech is a huge issue. The problem is actually that we can't have proper discussions about the issues of Islamism in the UK, because you either get kicked out of the Tory party, you could lose your job from it, and then when you actually get into a position where you can start talking about it, like Matt Goodwin's in, you get people like you, Ella, that say, oh, but think about the right to protest. I'm sorry, you don't have a right to protest if it is pro-terrorism.
This government's response to difficult and entangled political issues like we've seen played out in Rochdale is to simply press the ban button. That's inadequate. It will not do anything for either protecting the Jewish community or furthering proper, open, substantial discussions about what's happening in Israel and Gaza.
Matt Goodwin is actually a goldmine for reaction gifs, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. But if you seriously think that jailing open Islamists and open supporters of Islamism isn't going to help the Jewish community in London when that is exactly what they're calling for, I don't know what else to tell you. Yes, the idea of radical Islamism isn't going to go away, but that's not the point. The point is that Jews are going to be feeling safe again about going out to London on Saturdays. Because at the moment, a lot of them practically feel like they're under house arrest. I mean, obviously they are free to go to parts of London where there aren't Islamist protests, but the point is that if they do want to do that, and there's plenty of reasons to want to go to central London on a Saturday, then they don't feel safe doing that, and we are not in a successful, open society if there are people that don't literally feel safe on the street in broad daylight. And again, this is why Matt is saying Jesus Christ under his breath constantly, because it is limp, flaccid liberalism that has no backbone. It's just, it feels a bit icky when the state actually starts to do something.
I think, Matt, I'm afraid that you have gone down a rather dark...
Here we go. I'm the only one on this panel, Ella, saying we should uphold the law.
Oh, God, I do love Matt Goodwin's reactions to absolutely every flaccid liberal out there, because he's right. He's on the panel against Ella Whelan, and all he's saying is, we have these laws in place, it's a good law, it's been successful in the past, can we just enforce it on Islamists, please? And Ella's here saying, oh, but it'll stifle free speech. Look, it was inevitably, I would not be shocked if it was used against IRA supporters. And Ella Whelan would technically be correct. That yes, doing it against IRA supporters didn't make the IRA go away. But apparently what did was surrendering to them on the Good Friday Agreement and releasing all of the prisoners who, by the way, were terrorists. If you are offering a similar solution to all Islamist extremists in the UK and just allowing them to be out and free and pandering to absolutely everything they're demanding of us, then fine, I guess you're free to want that and support that policy, but an awful lot of Brits want Britain to not be filled with free Islamist terrorists and their supporters.
Well, there are lots of things. There are lots of things about the law that I disagree with.
Well, apparently, yeah. I look forward to the Hamas metropolis you're going to build.
I didn't know that you were such a fan of the government and lawmaking. The question here is: are you for free speech or are you not? And I think you've lost that freedom bone.
I would not want to live in a society created by Ella Whelan. Let's put it that
right.
way.
I mean, that's where the argument ends, I'm afraid. With me agreeing once again with Matt Goodwin. No, I would not like to live in a world where Ella Whelan wants to get rid of laws that ban support for terrorism. I mean, for God's sake, as I said in the last video, MPs are now having to up their security game because they don't feel safe anymore. Parliamentary procedure completely changed because they don't feel safe anymore. And guess what's emboldening these threats and these people who are making the threats? The open support for the terrorism that is going on over in Gaza and Israel. I mean, again, I'm talking about this, but it seems to be the only issue people care about in the UK anymore, and these things are only getting worse. Being one of the only British Jews playing professional football has only become more challenging for Joe Jacobson this season and made the Wycombe Wanderers captain a target of hatred. The 37-year-old has revealed to Sky News how in the aftermath of October 7 Hamas atrocities and Israel's war on Gaza, he needed a security escort into the stadium and the League One club resisted demands to cut ties with him. Jacobson has avoided commentating publicly about the attacks on the deadliest day for the Jews since the Holocaust or the aftermath, but he did express concerns about protesters he believed were celebrating mass murder in the streets. And amazingly, oh look, High Wycombe, 24.1% Muslim. I'm afraid once again I need to make it clear to the police when they're watching through my videos when the Labour Party are in power, I am sorry I am noticing patterns. But I do not want to live in a country where even footballers who don't want to be political in any way are having to be political, and then if they're not being political, they need extra security because of a spike in anti-Semitism in Wycombe, and no doubt in other places as well. And obviously I need to make it clear, because I need to make it clear every time, I know it's not all Muslims. I'm not saying it's all Muslims, but obviously the more Muslims you have in a place, the more likely you are to have Islamists in that place. And they are going to be the anti-Semitic pro-terrorist types that force a football captain to need extra security just for going to his job. Anyway, I'm happy to hear that Ella Whelan would do pretty much nothing about that because, oh, they've got an opinion like everyone else, therefore it should be openly debated like everything else. I'm afraid that's not how it works. That's never how it has worked. There has been a line in the sand for absolutely everything when it comes to politics. They had to do it in America for the communists because they were in a Cold War with them. We had to do it to fascists in Britain because we were at war with the fascists. We have to do it now with Islamists because Islamists have decided they're at war with the West. And if someone's loyalties are openly lying more with Islamists who have declared war on the West with the countries of the West, then obviously something should be done about them. Because clearly, as a lot of European countries, as Matt Goodwin has said, have had enough of it. Clearly we have had too. We just need our police force, our parliament, all of our cultural elites to realise that it is the proper way to go. Anyway, that is everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.